is Edward Hoth, spelled H-O-T-H. I'm from Hazlet, New Jersey.
Okay. Next, please.
My name is Felix DelGiudice, F-E-L-I-X, last name capital D-E-L, capital G-I-U-D-I-C-E, DelGiudice. I'm from East Haven, Connecticut.
And
And
My name is Myron Leissler. Everybody calls me Jack. I only used Myron when I had to enlist in the Marine Corps, and they made me use it. I'm 86 years old, and I'm from
I'll ask that question. Okay. So what
Okay.
is your birthday?
10/23/29.
Year of Great Depression.
Yeah, it's a depression area.
Yep. And Felix.
11/20/29.
11/20/29. And Edward.
11/26/30.
So 29, 29, and 30. You are the youngest here.
Yeah, I'm the kid.
Young
And where were you born?
Jersey City, New Jersey.
Jersey City. And how about you?
New Haven, Connecticut.
New Haven. That's where Yale University is. And
I was born in Cincinnati, but I live in North Bend, Ohio now.
Cincinnati, Ohio.
Right.
You know, how you become the bodies here? Did you guys met in camp, or how did you become know each other?
We're all three in the same outfit.
What is it? The outfit?
Easy Company.
Easy
E
Company.
E Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, 1st Marine Division.
Second Battalion and Regiment. Do you have?
The regiment is the 1st Marines.
Tell me about how you met together. Who wanna say that?
I went in a little before Jack. I went in 1947. Jack went in 1948. I went to Guam, and I was in China when we evacuated the last American personnel out of China. I came back to the States by way of the Panama Canal and went to Camp Lejeune. At Camp Lejeune, I met Jack Leissler. I joined the outfit he was in, which was the 21st Marines, and we went overseas to the Mediterranean together, and so I've known Jack for all these many years. But that's how I met Jack. How I met Eddie, I met him over in Korea when he was a rifleman, but actually was a BAR man, and that's a automatic weapon that he fired. And they both were juveniles compared to me.
Do you disagree?
You told me you were
Felix and I
machine-
were both
machine
in the
gun.
machine guns, machine gun platoon, and Ed was in a rifle platoon. And I had the unfortunate appearance or a circumstance to have him as my sergeant when I was a corporal, because he was a tyrant. And we've been friends for all those years. And then I met Ed when we were actually in Korea. I didn't know him before we got there. Ed? Oh, you got it.
So, how did you meet? Two of them.
Well, they were in the
Speak to your
machine.
microphone, please.
They were in the machine gun platoon,
Uh-huh.
and the machine gun platoon had 3 squads of 2 machine guns each. And when we got into maneuvers, each squad of machine guns went to one of the rifle platoons, and that's how I met them.
Where did you arrive in Korea? 3 of you arrived in Korea at the same time?
No.
No.
I made the landing at Incheon at September 15th. And I believe Jack made I know Jack. We were together. We were in the same Amtrak when we went in. I don't know when Ed went.
I didn't join the regiment or the company until November of 1950.
So where did you arrive in Korea?
I landed in Wonsan.
Wonsan. Right. So 2 of you in the Incheon landing, right? Tell me about where did you go from Incheon landing?
we went inland and to Seoul, and along the way we fought several battles along the way. And one that stands out in my mind was at a place called Yong, and that was a tough one.
Why?
We took casualties, and they were pretty well entrenched.
North Koreans?
North Koreans.
And anybody who wants to tell me about the Seoul that you saw in September 1950? How was it?
It was demolished. I remember it. I think it was a train station. It at one time had a glass dome in it, and it was gone. But in subsequent times, I had a friend who went over to Korea and came back with pictures, and it's been restored. There's a glass dome back in it again. But the street fighting in Seoul was pretty tough, and we lost some people there, and we divided down the main street. We were the 1st Marines. We were on one side of the street, and the 5th Marines were on the other side. That's where our lines extended out from there. But it was a fight.
Felix, do you want to say something about the Seoul you saw in 1950 in September?
The Seoul I saw was not very good, because what happened, I had gotten wounded on the 20th of September outside Yongdongpo, and I went to a hospital ship. I didn't return till Seoul was secured. When I traveled through it, I got there the 29th. I was returned to duty on the 29th of September, and I believe MacArthur declared the city taken by the 26th, which it wasn't. But he declared it taken by the 26th. But it was the 29th, because there was a vicious attack, and a friend of mine, Stanley Christensen, wound up getting the Medal of Honor, and he was killed just outside of Seoul on the 29th. But I went through it, and I saw the devastation of the North Koreans had sandbags all around, and the railroad tracks and everything was torn up. And it wasn't a good sight.
So by the time that you were in Seoul, the ad wasn't there. So two of you, did you talk to each other? Were you close to each other, two of you, Myron and Felix?
We were friends before we went there, and he, like I said, he was my sergeant. He was a section leader, which had 2 machine guns, each one a squad, and I had one of the squads. And on the way there, we were approaching a place called Yongdongpo, and we had a night attack from the North Koreans. And a couple tanks came up, and their infantry, and my gun, and he was on his machine gun, but I had one of my squad members on mine, were firing at the infantry there, and the tanks were firing at us. And one of them fired up where his gun was, and hit just below his gun, and actually threw it over his head. While in my gun, I was down on the lower level, and I was in a pepper patch, and it hid the muzzle flashes of our machine gun, so they didn't see it. So we took care of the infantry, and then a fellow from Fox Company, a bazooka man, went out, and he knocked out a couple of them with his rocket launcher, and he got killed, and he later got the Navy Cross for his action. And then there was a 75 millimeter recoilless rifle farther back on another hill, and it took out the other tank.
What were your rank?
I was a corporal.
Corporal, and you were sergeant, so you were superior.
He was my boss, right?
Ah.
It's a
Superior
terrible.
in every way.
Tell me about it.
It's a terrible situation.
I understand that. So from Seoul, where did you go? Did you took the ship and to Wonsan?
Yes, after Seoul, we boarded the ship, and we went back and forth like a yo-yo, because the Wonsan Harbor was supposedly mined, which it was, because I believe one of the ships hit a mine, and there was some loss of life in there. And then at Wonsan, we went ashore, which was there was no resistance on the landing when we went ashore.
So that's by the time that you're arriving there, right?
Right.
And tell me about how you met with Felix and Myron. microphone.
when I got there and joined the company, most of the company was out on a patrol. I think you were down in Marjani.
Yes, Majani, where we got ambushed November 7th. So that's what he
And
came.
they eventually came back, and the company was reformed, and we moved from Wonsan up to Hungnam, and we were there for Thanksgiving, and from there we ended up going up to the reservoir.
When did you meet them?
Sometime in that period in November we met because
Somewhere.
you'd see all the riflemen, and sometime when you went to chow, most of the time you ate rations and so forth. But around Thanksgiving, you intermingled and you met different guys because you would see them and so forth, and you got to know them as Banana Peel or whatever name you wanted to give them. But Eddie was a
Well, when
barman.
we were on the move, each one of the sections of machine guns was attached to the platoons, and that's how you meet these guys.
Yeah, the machine gun would be here, and then there would be we have ammo carriers behind, and the riflemen would tie in with the machine guns on either side for support.
And from Hamhung, where did you go? Did you go up to the reservoir?
Up to the reservoir.
Tell me all those names that you went through. Did you go to Jinunmi, Godori, Hagaruri, or?
Well, we only got as far as Koto Rig.
Oh, 3 of you?
Yeah, we were all in the same company.
Right.
And when we got up there, the weather wasn't too bad, and there was nothing happening around there. And the other two regiments had gone up further, and we were only up there, 2 days or so, and then all hell broke loose.
What happened was we went up to Majani because they had guerrilla warfare, and we got ambushed, and we took a mean hit. We had 14 guys get killed, and I know altogether I think there was about almost 40 from a company, which is a company that only numbers about 200. But after we went up to, after Thanksgiving, we went up, but what had happened was the General Smith, O.P. Smith, had the brains enough to know that we were strung out, and he dragged his feet, and he put one unit up at Hagaroo and New Damney and Coterie. He put the 5th, the 7th, and the 1st Marine, and he dragged his feet because, and I'll be very frank, Ned Alman was a showboater. He wanted to, and if I use the term you're going to show this to kids, he wanted to pee in the Yalu River, and he was rushing things, and he left himself wide open.
Who?
Ned Alman, who was
Almond.
Ned,
Yeah, General Almond, yes.
yes, and so he was a showboater. The Marine Corps stuck together. The windup was the 8th Army on that side. When they got hit, they just fell back, and they fell back, and the 1st Marine Division was surrounded in the reservoir, and then each unit pulled back together to come together, and we came together in Coterie, and around December 8th, we left, and we pulled out. As a matter of fact, our company, Easy Company, was the rear guard action. There were some tanks, I believe, behind us, and we pulled out, and there were an awful lot of, they made a movie, but they had poor refugees there that they were held back, and we pulled out. We were the last element of rear guard action, and then we came down to Ham, whatever it is.
You know, I'd like to say one thing, though, that
Yeah.
the 7th Infantry, which is also one of the divisions in the 10th Corps, which we were part of up there in the reservoir, they were on the other side of the reservoir, and they got decimated. And a lot of them escaped, and they came in as stragglers. We took them into our lines at Coterie, straggling in. Pitiful sight. But at the same time, we were getting refugees coming down from up there too, because they were trying to flee the fighting. And here they were running right down to where the fighting was going to be.
Just want to point out another factor that was overlooked and just slid over. The weather was atrocious. And it's reported that one night it got 42 below zero. Yeah, but normally it was, below zero and so forth. During the day, when you got to be 18, 17 below zero, it didn't appear to be that cold because you were getting, I guess, acclimated to the way of the weather. But some of those nights, when that wind blew in from the north, it was fierce. And that was another element because all the guns became sluggish. I mean, prior to that, you put oil on your weapon so it would function. But the oil, with that severity of the coal, froze them. It froze. The oil froze.
Yep.
So there was great difficulty. And as far as eating, and people forget about the other thing, your bodily functions. Those were, some of them guys got so constipated and stuff. I mean, people don't like to hear that, but that's the reality of it. I mean, you had to be a brave soul just to urinate, because exposed to that coal. I mean, it was something.
Yeah.
And it froze when it hit the ground.
Let me.
That's how cold it was.
Yeah.
Couldn't write your name in the snow.
While we were there, we had gone up a very narrow road, and there was a power plant up there with a bridge across it. Well, the Chinese blew that bridge out.
Tread pass.
Tong
Tread
Yeah, in
pass.
Funchilin
Yeah,
Pass.
yeah.
And the one of the generals had a bright idea of using a treadway bridge, and they brought it in, flew it in from Japan on C-119s, and they dropped them right in the area where we were, so we seen it all
You
come
saw
down.
that?
Yeah,
Three of you saw that?
No, we didn't see that.
Treadway.
we seen the bridges come down from
Come
the
down.
plane, and fortunately, we had our own engineers battalion, and there was a battalion of Army engineers, and they're the ones that put that bridge into position.
Let me tell you something
Sure.
humorous that happened at Coterie. We looked up one day and here there were Chinese all over the hills around us. So they sent a platoon up the hill to try to dislodge them, to get rid of them. And my machine gun squad was the one that went up, and we were firing away at the Chinese on a hill across the valley like. And all of a sudden I heard a scuffle behind me, and here the medical corpsman had jumped in the foxhole with me. I heard another one, and here it was the chaplain jumped in with me. And I heard another one a little bit later, and here it was Felix, my squad leader, my section leader, jumped in with me, and he looked around, and a corpsman on one side, a chaplain on the other, and a machine gun in front, and he said, "This is the safest I felt since I've been in Korea."
Oh my goodness. So you went down to Hamhung and evacuated, right? And then what happened to you guys?
The boats took us down to Seoul then, or Pusan, I mean, Pusan, and then we boarded a narrow gauge railroad that took us to Maseon, and we spent Christmas down there getting in replacements and supplies and refitting, because there were a lot of weapons that needed to be replaced too. So Christmas was in Maseon.
And how was Christmas dinner?
The Marine Corps provided a Christmas dinner for us down there, and the temperature was a lot better. It was sure it was really nice.
Well,
down
we
there.
had actually Christmas dinner twice. The Navy was supplying it, so they did. And the Army also sent us Christmas dinner. So we had dinner one day, and 2 days later we had another one.
Wow.
And
And also-
it was turkey and all the trimmings and candy. In fact, they even come up with a can of beer rash. One can of beer a man.
I thought he was going to miss that. No, it became a case. Everybody had a case of beer before.
Eventually.
A case of
but
Budweiser apiece.
Initially, it was one can.
What was it? Brand name?
Budweiser.
Budweiser? That's why this veteran's looking for Budweiser, huh? So then from Maseon, where did you go? Did you went up to 38 parallel again?
Eventually, we got up there.
Do you know where it was?
I think did we go from Maseon up to Andong?
Yeah, we were at Andong, yeah.
Andong.
Yeah.
And then, what was in there in Andong? Did you had a battle there? No.
There was supposed to be a guerrilla army in the area, and we go out on patrols from there. But
We never did find them.
no,
Mm-hmm.
they stayed on the run.
And then, where did you go from Andong?
We went up in the central front, and
Triangle? Iron Triangle?
No,
That
we
was
didn't get
before anybody called them
we
names
didn't
like
get there
that.
till
They didn't-
later. We ended up going to Hongsong,
Wengsong.
and the army had been there prior to us, and they got pushed back. And when we got there, we found army dead and destroyed equipment laying all around the area.
Wow.
So we ended up evacuating them, turning them into grave registration or wherever.
One thing I remember there too is we went out on a patrol that overlooked Hoensong, and when we got down in the area there, we found all these Dutch soldiers that had been killed, the Dutchmen, the Dutch element, and what we had heard is that the North Koreans put on South Korean uniforms and came in on them like they were looking for supplies, and when they got in amongst the Dutch soldiers, they killed them all.
Any other? So, you didn't have real battle in Andong and Wengsong, right?
But we were pushing it.
There were
At
skirmishes.
Hoensong, we were pushing all the time. We were
Right.
moving up on there. But at Andong, they didn't show up.
And after that, where did you go?
Stayed in the Central Front till you went home from there, didn't you?
I left in the end of February. I got home March 8th. I got home. I left. I had been wounded twice, so the scuttlebutt was that some fellow had been wounded 3 times and then got killed, and so evidently there was a kind of a hue and cry over that, and so the Marine Corps decided, I guess if you've been wounded a couple of times, push them out. So I got
Where
home.
did you get wounded? Where?
I got wounded in the hand, and I got wounded
No,
in.
in the place.
Oh, I got wounded after we were there I got wounded on the 18th of September, and then on the 20th of September, which was just outside of Yongdong-po.
Yongdong-po.
Yeah, and then
But the second wound, where did you get?
Yongdong-po.
Again?
The first was on the 18th of September.
Yeah.
A round came in, killed a number of guys, and
But you got that wound in the Yongdong-po, right?
No.
just prior to 2 days before.
Okay.
2 days before. And it was within 3 days I was wounded twice, and then I went back to.
So you left
hospital.
your buddies.
For 9 or 10 days.
Oh.
But then they said, "We can't do without you, Felix. Get back in there. You got a couple of guys that you have to take care of."
Your nose is going to grow like Pinocchio.
So, Myron, when did you leave Korea?
I left on April 1st, 1951.
How about you?
I didn't leave until November of 1951. I
Right, so
spent
you came
a little
late.
over a year there.
Yeah. Where did you fight while you 2 of your buddies left? Where were you?
We went after Andong. We went to Hongsong. I think we ended up going to Yangon.
Yanggu, yes. Very mountainous, right?
Oh yeah. I didn't think there was any flat part in that country. And where the heck else did we go? Chuncheon. I can't
So you
remember.
were in the east side.
We moved all around, and we spent 45 days continuously on the line, and we got off for a couple of days just in time for Easter. But we had been on the go, and a couple of days off the line, and you managed to get back to some sense of civilization, and then we were right back at it again. And we were on the move constantly. And we ended up around Inji.
Engine? Edward.
And
did
that's
you know
roughly where I left from.
Okay. Did you know anything about Korea before you left for Korea?
I knew where it was, but
You
beyond
knew
that,
You knew that?
oh yeah.
How? Did you learn about Korea during your high school?
I probably did learn something about it.
Uh-huh.
And right after the Second World War, they issued a set of postage stamps. And they on it had the flags of all the occupied countries. And of course, there was one for Korea in there. And that's how I ended up finding out about Korea.
How about Felix? Did you know anything about Korea?
Well, of course, I have to say this. When we went to school, I think our education was much better than they may be advanced now with all the technical stuff, and they can Google this and do that and so forth and get it at hand. But we learned it, and geography was one of the fine points. I mean, we knew where every country was. It was where Japan was and so forth. Especially then after World War II started and so forth, and then you knew about the Korean being overtaken by many people. We knew that the Japanese and the Manchurians and so forth. I mean, you read that. It wasn't predominant in our studies, but it was hit upon. So you knew all these things. You knew about Cortez and the conquistadors and Marco Polo, and you knew they taught you things. Some of the kids today don't even know what the hell the Civil War was about in this country.
Well, they don't teach geography
they
anymore.
don't do anything. I mean, Hastings.
There is a geography class, sure, but I'm not sure whether they are really globally aware of those.
They're not. I mean, sometimes you see these people on television, and they like Jay Leno, and they'd ask the people certain questions, and they were so asinine in answering. I mean, fundamental questions that kids should know in school. I have to be honest with you. I have one of my granddaughters is a school teacher. Sometimes I ask her questions, and she doesn't know. And I said, "You're a teacher."
What does she teach?
Well, she teaches kindergarten and first grade, but they teach the kids their A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and stuff like that.
A lot
Myron?
of the kids in school today, you mention a state capital, and they have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They just don't teach the same subjects that we
They
learn.
don't care about the capital city of state. But did you know anything about Korea, Myron? Be honest.
Well, yeah, I did. To this extent, I mean, I didn't know anything in depth about it, but
No, I mean, before you left for Korea, did you know anything about Korea?
well, I knew it was a divided country, and there was a dictator in the north, right, and that the Russians controlled it, and I figured that someday, I didn't think was thinking in terms of Korea, but I figured that someday we would be at war with the Russians, and
You are one of the most educated, chosen few veterans.
I am.
Most of them didn't know anything about Korea, didn't know where Korea was.
Well, see, my father was in World War II, and I started following the war news, of course, and it just got me in the habit of reading the news about these different things, about the communists taking over the North, and it looked like they were going to take over Europe the way it was going for a while there, but then they divided it up at the 38th parallel, and I guess I got it by osmosis.
Wow. And you been back to Korea after that? Recently? Nobody?
No.
I went back in 1985. 1985.
Oh, what program was it? How?
The 1st Marine Division put a revisit program together
You mean Korean government?
with the Korean government.
Yeah, yeah.
And I signed up and I went over and we spent a week there basically in Seoul. And we went up to the
Panmunjom?
Freedom Village
Yeah.
and we got a tour up there and it was something else. And what really surprised me, and it had never happened before, when I got on the flight to Korea in San Francisco, there was 2 women, and I guess it was mother and daughter, and a small child. And I got on the plane, and this little girl stepped out in the aisle and bowed to me. And it took me a while to realize what it was. And then, of course, when I got into Korea, it was all over the place. Every time you'd run into somebody, and then you realize that they were actually thanking us for saving their country. So I guess we did a good thing.
You thought? Yeah, you did. Well, I mean, many veterans tell me that this is the only nation that thanking back us. But from us, from our perspective, I think it's so natural that you came to aid of us 65 years ago, and now we are the strongest nation, one of the strongest nation in the world. And I think it's very natural for us to thank you, right? Why is that special to you guys? Tell me, please.
Well, everybody says, well, was it worth it? And, you can't just weigh it against your friends who might have been killed or seriously injured. But if we hadn't stepped in, all of Korea would be communist now. And North Korea is really a pretty horrible place. Their own people are starving, so their militarist leaders can build hydrogen bombs and increase their armaments. They'll let their people starve at the price of that.
So that's my point. So that's why Korean people is very grateful about the UN forces led by the United States.
I had seen a photograph taken of the Korean Peninsula, probably at night. And South Korea, you could tell, is all bright lights and all. And North Korea, other than around Pyongyang, is all dark.
A friend of mine went back to Korea on one of those tours, and he came back with a book full of pictures.
Reborn Korea.
Whatever it is.
Yeah, that is the name of the book.
But he opened up to Incheon, which was just a little podunk town when we went through there, and there's these high-rise and millions of people population now.
So what do you think about that? I mean, you saw Korea in 1950, right? And you know how completely destroyed. Now, the South Korea is 11th largest economy in the world with the size of Indiana. And we are the largest market share of the computer chip, semiconductor. Samsung, LG, Hyundai, they are the largest producer of computer chips. What do you think about this?
It shows you what democracy can do, and it shows you what a grateful people can do. And that's what they did. They pulled themselves by the bootstraps instead of looking for handouts like some of these other countries are doing. They took care of themselves, so it's a credit to the Koreans.
But we were able to do it because you gave us a chance to rebuild our nation. That's why we are doing this.
It makes it all worthwhile, doesn't it?
But you know that there are not much coverage of the Korean War in our history textbook.
You don't have to tell us it's a forgotten war.
Why is it forgotten?
I think the problem was that the country, the United States, after World War II, was so tired, of the lives that were lost and expended. And when the Korean War broke out, it was only
5 years.
and people weren't geared for it. They really weren't geared for it. And the Korean War was much more severe than the Vietnam War. I don't care what they say, because if you extrapolate the numbers, in they say there were about 39,000 deaths, but in reality there were 55,000 because there were some non-combat attributed.
Yeah.
And
So
that was in 3 years.
and that was in
that's the-
3 years, and there was a lull for about a year after the first year of fighting. There was a lull for about a year. Then, when they went to determine the line that was to be drawn, there was some fierce fighting to capture that property that they wanted. And if you go, the Vietnam War lasted 10 years. There were 55,000 deaths. So if you put it on a yearly basis, that's 5,500. If you put the Korean War on a yearly basis, you're talking probably 17,000. So it's triple the amount. And that's what people don't realize. But they were tired of war. That's what happened. They were tired of war.
But
So
let me challenge you. Didn't you want to forget about the war that you fought from Korea? When you came out of it, that severe winter, that much hardships and sufferings, didn't you want to forget about it?
I think we were you know, they spoke of the people of the Second World War as the greatest generation, but I think that we were part of it. Most of the guys, and I say most of them because there were some that were pissants and they would cry about it, but most of us just got on with our life. And I'm not toot my own horn, but I got a Silver Star, and it didn't mean a goddamn thing at all. Now, all of a sudden, I'm about 90 years old, and they honored me. And every time they honored me, it cost me money. And they recognized it now. 60 years later, you got a Silver Star, you got this, that. But when I first come out, it didn't mean anything. I mean, that and a dime could buy you a beer at that time. But nothing, nobody talked about it. We didn't talk about it, And my kids didn't, we never went into it. It was a fact of life, and we went on with our lives. We got married, we did our families, we got jobs, we did what we had to do. We didn't make a mountain out of a molehill, but that was our lifetime. Now, some of these people, they're in for a year or two, and they're homeless, and they're looking for handouts, and they got on drugs. I was high on life, and I'm still high on life. I never smoked, and I drink but not to excess, social drinker like anybody else.
So you got the Silver Star?
Silver Star and a Bronze Star.
Well,
But that and a couple of nickels and but I said this before. A lot of people revere people who were wounded or got a medal or something, but a lot of times people or soldiers and sailors, Marines, done things that were not recognized that warranted some kind of recognition, and they didn't get it. The Jack here got banged, but he refused to turn it in because he didn't want to alarm his mother, and so he never got a Purple Heart. And the worst thing is, at least when I got wounded, went aboard the hospital ship, I slept in peace for 9 days. I didn't have to worry about it. You think of the poor bastards that are still there, still fighting, because the fighting was still severe at that time. So you have to look at those guys that stick and stay and never got wounded. They're the heroes. They're the guys that should get the accolades.
Edward, do you want to add to that?
But one of the things I think that made the Korean War and the veterans that fought in it and then come back and did whatever is the way we were raised. We grew up in a depression, so we were used to not having anything. So whatever hardship was basically normal. And we got out,
Basically normal.
and, when the Vietnam veterans come back, they spit on them, call them baby kidders and all this. When we come back, they didn't even recognize us.
They didn't know who we were.
They didn't know, and they didn't really care.
They were asking.
So, geez, we just picked up, took the next step, went down the road.
Where have you been, right? Where have you been when you were returned, right? Myron, do you
And
want to add to
we
that?
never talked about it.
I'd like to give a little boost to the Tootsie Roll Company, who passed out Tootsie Rolls to us here in Candy. when we were up there, it was so doggone cold that the sea rations we had froze to death. They froze. Anyhow, we got those Tootsie Rolls and we put them inside our parkas, and our body heat would warm them enough that we could eat them. And Tootsie Rolls kept us alive.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, the sugar in it was nutrition, and that keeps you going. And it was mentioned yesterday that the vehicles, they get bullet holes in the radiator. The guys that chew the Tootsie Rolls, get them soft, plug the holes with them. And of course, it was so cold it would freeze, and that plugged the bullet holes in them.
Yeah, that's the story I heard. I have a question for three of you. You meet, since when did you meet through the reunion?
First time we got back together was in 1985. That was the first reunion of the Chosen Few, and it had only been formed about 2 years or so before. And in '84, they had a mini reunion in Washington. They were hoping to get 100 people. They had better than 400.
You know, that's the year that the Korean War Veterans Association was also formed for the first time. So at the end of 1953 and until '85, it's been silence here in the United States.
Felix and I had maintained some kind of contact between us. I mean, letters on. And I don't think we had visited each other prior to '80. Maybe we had.
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
Yes, we had. That's right. What on
Nice to
non-compass minute.
So my question is, what do you feel? How do you feel when you get together through this reunion? What do you, looking at each other, fighting together at the Godori, right? Hamgong, all these things. What do you feel?
Well, there's nobody closer to me than him. I mean, you know, we depend on each other. I think I said this to somebody. I said, if it hadn't been for the other one, neither one of us would be alive.
Tell me why.
Because we watched out for each other, and we took care of each other, and we performed to save one another.
Any episode
Any episodes?
that you almost saved his ass?
Well, we were
Felix?
overrun by the Chinese one night, and they kind of sneaked in on us, and I heard he was on a machine gun over to my left, and I was to the right, and they kind of sneaked in on him over on that side, and there was a shooting going on. All of a sudden, he yelled for me to turn the gun on over there because they're all around him, and I just yelled, "Everybody get down to the bottom of the hole," and I just raked the place. And if he hadn't yelled at me, you know, I wouldn't have known they were there until maybe it was too late. And I guess because I was shooting, why it helped his situation too.
It's okay. Just leave it there. Don't worry.
The damn thing doesn't want to stay on.
Felix, what do you think when you meet these two buddies through the reunion? What are you thinking?
Well, right now there's
Well, as time goes by, it's good to see these guys are still alive. And the reason I say this is we're losing people constantly.
Just talking. No
A
problem.
good friend of mine who was in my platoon moved in. He was living down in Naples, Florida, and he just passed away.
Felix, just leave
few
it.
months
I think
ago.
you
I got
break
it.
it.
No, I'll fix it. Don't worry.
He's not a mechanic.
Listen, what happened at this reunion? You're talking about this reunion. We had many others. We had many more of our friends that were in the same platoon. We had Denton, Taylor, Hellman, and so forth. Some of them can't make it because of the age is catching up to us. I mean, none of us are kids anymore. You're talking 86, 87, 88, and so it becomes increasingly difficult for some. We're comparatively good health compared to other people. So, yeah, it's good to see old friends, especially if they're. We had a guy. His name was Estegall. He stayed in for over 30 years. He was. I wish he was here today. He passed away a few years ago, but he'd be well over 90. But that man served in 3 wars. He was in the Second World War, some of the toughest battles, Saipan, Iwo Jima. He served in Korea, and then he served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. So that's the kind of people we have.
I'll tell you an instance, and this is how close we've gotten over the years.
Somebody's there.
I was in the hospital, and all of a sudden I get a phone call, and it's Jack calling me. So we talked a while, and I hung up. And I said, how the heck did he know I was in a hospital, and where? A little while later, Felix calls me. And I figured out, well, Jack must have let Felix know. Well, Jack's in Ohio, Felix is up in Connecticut. An hour or so later, I get another call, and it's John Beasley, who was our president. He calls me from Alaska. So that's how close this bunch has gotten. And I figured out how they ended up finding it. Well, Jack let everybody know. But that's how close we've gotten over the years.
Should be, right? Yeah. This is the brochure that I just gave you, the foundation's brochure. And if you unfold it, there are one picture there, big one. Do you see that? Right? Yeah. That's the History and Social Studies Teachers Conference that my foundation hosted in June, Orlando, Florida. And there are 90 teachers from 25 states. And the reason though they came is because to learn more about the foundation and to learn more about the Korean War and to use these videos in their classroom so that and students love to hear from you directly rather than reading one paragraph about the Korean War in our history textbook. So if you and we're going to have another history teachers conference next year in Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. If you know of any teachers in your district or in your area who might be interested in doing this, please let them know and let me know, because my foundation covers their hotel, meals, and half of airfare. Okay? And I think this is the best way to keep your legacy and let our children know about what happened during the Korean War. All right?
I've got a granddaughter that's a teacher, and you got a daughter.
I got a daughter, and I got 3 grandchildren that are all teachers.
Really? So,
Yeah, I got a granddaughter that's a teacher too.
oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So you gotta talk to them and see if they want to come to next year to Mount Rushmore.
I won't talk to Roxanne because she'll go in a minute. She's my daughter, but
The
she's
address
60
that
something.
she would apply to is on here in the back, I presume.
Yeah, you have my business card, so ask them to email me, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Are we going to conclude this, my friend?
Yes.
Because we're going to go out. I want to go take a nice shower
And
and get cleaned up again and change my
About
clothes.
time.
Well, I usually take the shower on Saturday, but
so give the microphone to him.
he's got it.
No, you.
What do you want from me?
Conclude it. Conclude the whole interview.
Listen, we had a wonderful time here. Our host took care of us. We didn't get any water or anything to drink, but it's all right. We realized he's very ambitious, and I wish him well in his endeavor, and I'm glad that somebody has taken the interest to let people know about the forgotten war, the Korean War. It's certainly not forgotten by the veterans that were there and their families. Thank you again.
Thank you, Felix, really. Please conclude it, Myron.
Well, yeah, Felix kind of touched on it there. It's kind of refreshing that there's still an interest in this, because when we came back, the general populace, is almost like we sneaked into the country, back into the country, because obviously they were still so tired of World War II that when this one came around, why, they were exhausted. So that when the fighting, the actual heavy fighting was over in Korea, but yet they were at a stalemate, and the population must have just lost interest and went away. And then you have those goofballs who are peaceniks that were willing to sell us out to the communists, and they used the war and the casualties of the war to bolster their argument. Freedom isn't free.
Edward?
Well, I'm glad that somebody finally got around to recognizing the war that was in Korea, other than the Korean people, which we know really appreciate what we did. But the American people have no idea what we did, and I'm glad somebody's getting around to show it and let them know that it wasn't no police action, as Harry Truman had called it at the time. It was a real war with real casualties.
Yeah. Thank you so much again for three of you come together